Welcome in, everybody. Ready for a deep dive into a world that's got it all. Ritual, athleticism, and yeah, a little bit of scandal. We're talking sumo wrestling and its ties to, believe it or not, organized crime.
Sumo and organized crime. You might be thinking that's an odd combination.
Definitely an odd combination.
Yes,
On the one hand, you've got this ancient sport steeped in tradition, almost sacred in Japan.
absolutely. Sumo isn't just a sport over there, it's woven into the very fabric of their society, representing strength, discipline, spiritual values, the whole nine yards.
So then you've got the Yakuza, Japan's infamous underworld. Not exactly known for their gentle touch, yet history paints a very intertwined picture.
A fascinating and complicated history it is.
And one of the figures who pops up early on in our research is Yamaguchi Noboru. Now, this guy was a notorious Yakuza boss back in the 1920s.
Oh, Yamaguchi Noboru, quite the character. He saw sumo as a way to expand his gang's reach, to gain influence in the entertainment world. The man had vision, albeit a rather crooked one.
So right off the bat, we see these two worlds, sumo and the Yakuza, starting to intersect. But to really get this, we need to rewind a bit. Sumo back then, it wasn't the formal, highly structured sport we see today, right?
You're right. It was a much different scene back then. More like traveling entertainment, groups of wrestlers moving from town to town. They needed support, protection, someone to, well, make sure things ran smoothly, shall we say.
And that's where the Yakuza stepped in, providing muscle, logistics, that kind of thing.
It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. The wrestlers got the support they needed, and the Yakuza, well, they got to rub shoulders with these tough, revered athletes. Our sources even call it a macho admiration that developed between them.
Macho admiration, I like that. But how did this admiration play out in practical terms? Did the Yakuza just show up at matches?
It went beyond that. Think lavish gifts, financial support, access to exclusive events. The Yakuza, they were always looking for ways to legitimize themselves to gain a foothold in respectable society. And what better way than to align themselves with these larger-than-life sumo wrestlers?
So the Yakuza saw an opportunity to boost their own status. But what did the wrestlers get out of it? I mean, they were already respected figures.
True, but don't underestimate the allure of financial backing, especially for young wrestlers from humble backgrounds. This support could mean better training, better nutrition, and of course the perks that came with Yakuza generosity. It was a tempting proposition, no doubt about it.
It sounds like a slippery slope.
It was. And this is where those sumo stables, the training facilities where wrestlers live and breathe sumo, come into play. Because of their close ties to wrestlers who might be, shall we say, indebted to the Yakuza, some stables became entangled in the Yakuza's affairs.
You're saying these sumo stables, places meant for discipline and tradition, became, what, fronts for illegal activities?
Not all of them, of course, but it did happen. It's a classic tale. Organized crime infiltrating legitimate institutions, using them for their own ends.
And in this case, it's happening right under the surface of this revered, almost sacred sport. So you've got these two worlds, sumo and the Yakuza, becoming increasingly intertwined. It's a recipe for trouble, and eventually that trouble boils over, rather.
It certainly does. And to really grasp how big of a deal these scandals were, we have to remember what sumo represents in Japan.
Right, you said earlier it's almost sacred.
Exactly. Sumo embodies discipline, hierarchy, respect for tradition, centuries-old values deeply ingrained in Japanese society. So these scandals weren't just about athletes breaking rules.
It was about betraying the very heart of what sumo represents.
You got it. It shook the nation. And one of the first big cracks in the facade, at least according to our sources, appears with the story of Shuga Konoshin.
Shuga Konoshi, wasn't he a former wrestler?
Yeah, and in the 1990s, he really blew the whistle on what he claimed was rampant match fixing and, of course, deep-rooted Yakuza influence within sumo. He even co-wrote a tell-all book spilling all the secrets.
And then, what, he mysteriously disappeared?
Not quite. See, here's where it gets really strange. Shuga died very suddenly, just a month after his book was published. Officially, it was pneumonia and heart failure, but the timing, it was awfully suspicious given everything he'd exposed.
Oh, come on. That's way too convenient.
And to make it even more eerie, Shuga's co-author also passed away under equally strange circumstances, only 15 hours later, if you can believe it. Now, whether foul play was involved or not is still up for debate, but let's just say Shuga's death definitely cast a long, dark shadow over the sport.
It sounds like the plot of a crime thriller. Did the sumo world just try to sweep it under the rug?
For a while, it seemed like it. But then came the Kotomitsuki gambling scandal in 2010, and things really blew up. This wasn't just a few wrestlers placing bets on the side. This was serious stuff, revealing just how deep the Yakuza's influence had become.
I remember that one. Kota Mitsuki, he was a top wrestler, right?
One of the best. And he was dismissed from Sumo because of the scandal, along with his stable master. The investigation also implicated at least 18 other wrestlers in illegal gambling. So yeah, this was a big deal.
What happened in the aftermath? Were there consequences?
Oh, huge consequences. Sponsors bailed, fans were outraged, and NHK, Japan's national broadcaster, they refused to air the tournament live for the first time in over half a century. Can you imagine?
Wow. Talk about a blow to Sumo's reputation.
Yeah.
But as bad as that scandal was, our research shows that 2011 was even worse. What happened then?
If 2010 was about gambling, 2011 was about the very integrity of the sport. Match fixing, or yaocho, as they call it in Japan.
So wrestlers were intentionally losing.
More than that. The police actually found text messages between wrestlers detailing exactly how they were going to throw matches. And all for a hefty payoff, of course.
Hold on. Are you saying they weren't just losing on purpose, but they were actually, planning out specific moves in advance?
Precisely. It was orchestrated cheating, plain and simple. And to make matters worse, it involved a lot of wrestlers, not just a few bad apples. The March 2011 tournament, it had to be canceled. Can you believe that? An unprecedented move. Ultimately, 14 wrestlers were forced out of the sport.
So in just a couple of years, sumo was rocked by not one, but two massive scandals. It had to have been incredibly damaging, not just for the sport's image, but for its soul. So the sport's reeling, its reputation is shot. What do you even do if you're the Japan Sumo Association, the JSA? Where do you even begin to fix this?
It was a massive undertaking, no doubt. On the one hand, they had to show they were serious about cleaning up the sport, but sumo is steeped in tradition with these, well, let's just say powerful figures, and change wasn't going to be easy.
So what they do?
Well, they started by banning what they called violent groups from sumo venues and training stables.
Violent groups, right. That's code for Yakuza, isn't it?
You said it, not me. But then our sources mention Yakuza members still getting those ringside seats, so how effective could a ban really be?
I guess you can't keep everyone out. So what else? More security. Background checks.
They definitely stepped up security at tournaments, that's for sure. Cameras, more personnel, trying to make it much harder for any Yakuza business to happen right under their noses.
And did they ever go after the Yakuza directly?
The police launched investigations, trying to root out the corruption. It was a bit of a catch-22, though. Every time they found something, it just proved how deep the ties really were.
It's like trying to get rid of termites. They just keep coming back. Did they do anything with the wrestlers themselves, though? I mean, to try and prevent this from happening again?
They started educational programs for the wrestlers, talking about ethics, the dangers of organized crime, that sort of thing. Try to instill some responsibility, teach them right from wrong.
Seems like it might be a little late for that, don't you think?
You're probably right. But in the JSA's defense, they were dealing with a lot. Trying to preserve the sport, its traditions, all while navigating this web of, well, let's just say less than savory connections.
It was a tightrope walk, for sure.
Absolutely, and I think that's what makes the whole story of sumo and the Yakuza so fascinating. You have this ancient sport clashing with the modern world, grappling with these huge scandals. It makes you think about the price of tradition, the responsibility to change, but also how hard it is to let go of the past.
It's a story that stays with you. Well, folks, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of sumo and its complicated relationship with organized crime. We've seen how deeply intertwined these worlds became, the scandals that rocked the sport, and the ongoing struggle to find a balance between tradition and reform. It's a story that's both fascinating and a little bit heartbreaking, reminding us that even the most revered institutions can have a dark side. But hey, that's what makes these deep dives so interesting, right? Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring those hidden corners of the world.